Today we're diving into 10 Ferraris that disappointed harder than anyone expected. These are the cars that looked incredible in photos, sounded legendary on paper, and then turned out to be awkward, frustrating, unreliable, or just plain embarrassing in real life. One of them got mocked online nonstop. One was so slow it lost an old Mitsubishi. One was so ugly people treated it like a design crime scene. Let's get into it. Uno, Ferrari 488 Pista. The 488 Pista is one of those cars that sounds amazing until you actually imagine living with it. On paper, it's a dream. Huge power, sharp handling, track-bred performance, and all the Ferrari drama people love. In real life, though, it can feel like a race car that accidentally got a license plate. Yes, it's brutally fast. Yes, the V8 is powerful. But that kind of performance becomes a headache the second you leave the track and enter normal life. In traffic, all that aggression feels wasted. It's like bringing a flamethrower to toast bread. And then there's the suspension. Ferrari clearly decided comfort was for weaker people because the 488 Pista rides like it has a personal problem with your spine. Every bump, every crack, every imperfect road feels like punishment. You don't drive this car so much as survive it. The interior doesn't help either. Ferrari stripped things back in the name of performance, which means the cabin feels more like a lightweight experiment than a luxury supercar. It's focused, yes, but also cold, stiff, and weirdly joyless for something that costs this much. And reliability? That's where the fantasy starts cracking. For a car at this level, owners expected precision. What some of them got instead were electronics issues, heat-related problems, and way too much time talking to service departments. A supercar is supposed to turn heads, not constantly turn on warning lights. 2. Ferrari Testarossa. The Testarossa is one of the most famous Ferraris ever made. It's a poster car, a pop culture icon, a machine people dreamed about as kids. And that is exactly why the disappointment hurts more. Because once you get past the nostalgia, the Testarossa starts looking less like a masterpiece and more like a beautiful mess. Sure, the side strakes are iconic, but they're also one of those design details people praise mostly because the car became famous, not because they actually make the car better. The rear end is awkward, the proportions are heavy, and the whole thing can feel more dramatic than elegant. Then you drive it, and suddenly the dream gets a lot less magical. The Testarossa was never the sharp, nimble weapon people imagined. It's wide, heavy, and not exactly eager to dance through corners. Steering it can feel like negotiating with something that doesn't fully trust you. You expect excitement. Sometimes what you get is effort. Inside, it doesn't exactly redeem itself. The cabin can feel oddly clunky, the driving position isn't amazing, and some of the materials feel far less special than the badge promises. Then you add in the old Ferrari reliability reputation, electrical faults, expensive repairs, unpredictable behavior. And you start to realize this car is much easier to love on a wall than in a garage. 3. Ferrari California. If Ferrari had ever tried to make a car for people who wanted the badge more than the experience, the California was probably that car. This thing was supposed to be the usable Ferrari. More comfortable, more friendly, more accessible. A softer version of the brand that could appeal to a wider audience. Sounds smart in theory. The problem is, in the process, Ferrari built a car that felt weirdly forgettable. The design is one of the biggest issues. Nothing about the California screams Ferrari with confidence. It doesn't look dangerous, exotic, or unforgettable. It looks like a Ferrari made after too many committee meetings. The performance is another letdown. The V8 makes noise, sure, but the car often feels softer and heavier than you want it to. Instead of feeling like a dramatic Italian sports car, it can feel like a luxury cruiser pretending to be one. And inside? Not great. The cabin doesn't have the special feeling you expect from Ferrari. Some of the controls feel cheap, the layout feels uninspired, and the whole thing gives off expensive GT car energy instead of Italian icon. Then come the electronics issues, the random failures, and a not-so-Ferrari-like ownership experience. The California wasn't a total disaster, but for a Ferrari, kind of boring is almost worse. 4. Ferrari F50. The F50 had one of the hardest jobs in Ferrari history. Follow the F40. That alone was dangerous. Because when you follow a legend, you don't get judged like a normal car. You get judged like the sequel to a perfect movie. And for a lot of people, the F50 never lived up to that pressure. Let's start with the design. Some people love it. A lot of people really don't. It looks exaggerated, awkward, and slightly overcommit, like the styling team kept adding race car ideas until the whole thing forgot how to be beautiful. The V12 should have saved it. In theory, a Ferrari V12 with Formula One inspiration sounds unbeatable. In practice, the F50 often felt more difficult than thrilling. It had attitude, but not always the kind owners actually wanted. It could feel raw in the wrong ways, temperamental, noisy, and more work than joy. The cabin was also unapologetically harsh. Minimal comfort, stripped-out feeling, loud everything, very little softness. Ferrari wanted it to feel like a race car for the road, and it did. Unfortunately, most people don't actually enjoy living with a race car on the road. What really hurt the F50, though, was that for all its hype, it didn't always deliver the kind of confidence a Halo Ferrari should. It was fast, yes, but at the limit, it could feel edgy and less planted than people expected. Instead of feeling like a masterpiece, it often felt like an unfinished argument. 5. Ferrari FF. The Ferrari FF is one of those cars that makes you stop and ask, who exactly was this for? Ferrari decided to build a 4-seat, all-wheel drive hatchback-style Grand Tourer, which is already a sentence that sounds like it should belong to another brand. Then they gave it a V12 and told the world it was still a Ferrari through and through. The result? One of the strangest-looking Ferraris ever made. From some angles, it looks sleek. From others, it looks like a supercar that got stretched into a weird luxury wagon. It never fully commits to one identity. It doesn't look delicate enough to be a beautiful exotic, and it doesn't look practical enough to feel honest as a family car either. The V12 is powerful, sure, but the car itself feels confused. It's heavy, oversized, and not nearly as graceful as you'd want. Ferrari tried to combine speed, practicality, and grand touring luxury into one package, and somehow made the whole thing feel slightly off. Inside, it's no masterpiece either. The cabin tries to be upscale, but there are parts of it that feel less polished than a Ferrari should. Some details look great, others feel oddly ordinary, and overall it lacks the magic you expect from the badge. Then there's reliability. FF ownership has never exactly had a reputation for peace and quiet. Various issues, service trips, and expensive fixes mean the car can become less of a grand tour and more of a long-term relationship with a workshop. 6. Ferrari 348. The Ferrari 348 is one of those cars that made people wonder if Ferrari had temporarily forgotten how to build a proper driver's car. This thing had the looks of a classic Ferrari from the era. Mid-engine, aggressive stance, sharp lines, proper badge. It had all the ingredients. But once people drove it, the romance started fading fast. The big complaint was always the handling. The 348 developed a reputation for being unpredictable and awkward, especially near the limit. Instead of inspiring confidence, it often made drivers feel like the car was one bad decision away from making them regret everything. The steering wasn't the issue so much as the overall balance. The car felt nervous, less composed than rivals, and more difficult than it needed to be. Not exciting difficult, annoying difficult. Then you look inside, and things don't improve much. The materials could feel underwhelming. Some switches and plastics seemed cheaper than they should have, and the interior lacked the sense of occasion people wanted. It wasn't terrible. It just wasn't Ferrari special. Even the V8, which should have been a highlight, didn't fully rescue the car. It made noise, but not enough magic. It delivered performance, but not enough drama. For a brand built on emotional punch, the 348 somehow managed to feel like a Ferrari people defended more than they loved. Cette Ferrari Mondial 8. The Mondial 8 is one of those Ferraris people joke about before they even start the engine. And honestly, it's hard to blame them. This was Ferrari trying to make something more practical, more spacious, more usable, and ending up with a car that felt like a compromise in almost every direction. It had a V8, it had a Ferrari badge, and it had enough disappointment to supply an entire owner's forum. The performance was weak for what people expected. The car wasn't quick enough to feel thrilling, and with the automatic it felt even slower. You put your foot down expecting Ferrari excitement, and instead get the emotional energy of a late airport pickup. Reliability also didn't help. Electrical gremlins, brake complaints, general headaches. The Mondial 8 became one of those cars that taught owners patience whether they wanted the lesson or not. At some point, a bad Ferrari stops feeling exotic and starts feeling like punishment with nice paint. And then there's the design. Some people appreciate it today in a weird retro way. But even Ferrari fans have spent decades trying to convince themselves it looks better than it actually does. The proportions are awkward, the stance is strange, and nothing about it really sells the fantasy. The Mondial 8 isn't just one of the weakest Ferraris. It's one of the easiest Ferraris to make fun of. 8. Ferrari 365 GTC4. The 365 GTC4 is the kind of Ferrari that makes you double-check the badge. Not because it's shocking or wild, but because it's so visually flat that it almost feels like the anti-Ferrari. This was supposed to blend luxury and performance, but instead it ended up feeling like one of the least exciting ways to own a V12 Ferrari. The styling is a huge part of the problem. It doesn't have the elegance of Ferrari's best Grand Tours, and it doesn't have the aggression of the sports cars either. It sits in a strange middle ground where everything looks a little too safe, a little too tired, and a little too forgettable. The V12 sounds promising, but the car itself doesn't deliver enough urgency. It feels big, heavy, and more relaxed than a Ferrari should. Not relaxed in a majestic way, relaxed in a why am I not more excited way. Inside, it also suffers from that awkward old-school GT problem where the cabin doesn't feel as premium as the price or badge suggest. Some of the ergonomics are clumsy, some details feel dated in the wrong way, and the overall experience is more dull than charming. The worst part is that the car never quite justifies itself. It isn't outrageously beautiful. It isn't outrageously fast. It isn't outrageously special. It just sort of exists, which, for a Ferrari, is almost unforgivable. 9. Ferrari 400i. The Ferrari 400i is one of the best examples of how a V12 and a Ferrari badge still can't save a car from becoming deeply awkward. This was Ferrari trying to do luxury in a big, formal, understated way. The problem is that instead of looking elegant, the car often looks like a big metal box that somehow wandered into an exotic car showroom by mistake. The styling is blunt, the proportions are heavy, and the whole thing has the charisma of a very expensive filing cabinet. It's not dramatic enough to be exotic and not graceful enough to be beautiful. It just looks big, really big. Under the hood, the V12 sounds like it should make everything okay. It doesn't. Because once reliability enters the story, the fantasy collapses. The 400i developed a reputation for being fragile, costly, and way too familiar with mechanics. For owners, that meant one thing: a car that often felt more like a project than a luxury machine. Inside, it's not much better. The cabin can feel dated, awkward, and not especially rich. Some materials feel underwhelming. The layout is clumsy, and the whole atmosphere is more old executive transport than Ferrari glamour. Driving it doesn't exactly save the day either. The 400i feels big, heavy, and not especially sharp. You don't so much guide it as persuade it. For a car that should have felt powerful and elegant, it often feels like hard work wearing leather. 10. Ferrari 208 GTB/GTS Turbo. And finally, the Ferrari 208 GTB/GTS Turbo, a car that proves not every Ferrari with a turbo badge deserves confidence. On paper, it sounds interesting. Smaller engine, turbocharged setup, classic Ferrari shape. In reality, this thing became famous for all the wrong reasons. The biggest issue was simple. It just didn't feel fast enough. When people hear Ferrari Turbo, they expect urgency, drama, violence, something that shoves you back in the seat and reminds you why this brand exists. Instead, the 208 often felt underpowered, hesitant, and less alive than the body promised. It's the kind of car that looks like it should dominate traffic and then risks getting embarrassed by something much cheaper. And yes, the styling still has Ferrari charm, but it also feels slightly off, like a proper Ferrari that got scaled down and lost some of its authority in the process. It has the silhouette, but not the full presence. The interior doesn't rescue it either. The materials and ergonomics feel outdated even by the standards of the time, and the overall atmosphere doesn't exactly scream premium performance machine. It feels more like a compromise than a dream. Then add the usual ownership headaches, breakdowns, unpredictability, mechanical moods, and you get a Ferrari that feels less like an icon and more like a warning. So those were 10 Ferraris that disappointed far more than people expected. Not all of them were total disasters. Some were just overhyped. Some were flawed. Some were weird experiments that never really came together. But all of them proved the same thing. Even Ferrari, with all its history, all its money, and all its mythology, can still get it badly wrong.